An older man once saved a homeless boy, and 5 years later, he witnessed that same boy performing on the grand stage of a colossal concert hall. In the quaint town, enveloped in the gentle morning light, Mr. Henry walked with the assuredness of someone who knew every cobblestone underfoot. His steps were deliberate and steady, and his well-tailored suit accentuated the slenderness of his figure, a testament to his graceful aging. The townspeople greeted him with respect and affection at every corner. Many of them, their children, or even grandchildren, had once been his students. "Good morning, Mr. Henry," echoed from all sides. Henry responded with a smile and a wave, occasionally pausing for a brief chat. A smile often graced his lips, but a shadow of melancholy lingered in his eyes as he recalled his many years as a music teacher. He felt pride but also a sharp pang of sorrow from losing his wife and ending his career. Continuing down the main street toward the small park at the town's center, Mr. Henry was enveloped in a sea of memories. He had brought his students here for spring picnics, met his future wife many years ago, and shared his last walk with her here before illness took her away. A wave of weakness washed over him as he passed by an old bench. He stopped and sat down, letting memories of the last day spent here with his wife flood his mind. With his eyes closed, he almost felt her delicate presence beside him and heard her laughter from long ago. The bench held the warmth of their shared moments, and the carved initials reminded him of the infinity of time and how quickly it could slip away. Thoughts of loneliness briefly clouded his mind, but the desire to live and savor every moment pulled him back to reality. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and went to the market. Mr. Johnson was already there, eagerly extending his hand to Mr. Henry. Everything in this gesture spoke of the townspeople's unwavering respect and attachment to him. After exchanging words about the weather and town news, Mr. Johnson unexpectedly expressed his wish for Mr. Henry to teach music to his youngest daughter again. "There's no one better than you to pass on the love of music to her," he said hopefully. Mr. Henry smiled gently, his gaze sweeping the streets where children played. He realized that despite all his doubts and fears, he was still needed in this world, with his knowledge and ability to inspire new generations. With this thought, a spark ignited in his heart, and he finally said, "You know I'm already old and can't teach anymore," Mr. Henry said with a resigned sigh. After his morning walk, Mr. Henry returned home. His house stood on the outskirts of town, where the rustle of leaves and birdsong replaced the noise of the streets. As he pushed aside the old flowerpot hiding the key, he thought about all the moments this threshold had witnessed, joys and sorrows alike. The key clicked in the lock, and the door opened. Stepping inside, Mr. Henry was greeted by the familiar coziness of his spacious hall. Photographs adorned the walls, capturing moments of life, students' smiles, and scenes from music competitions. Shelves held old sheet music, books, and trophies from his students, each bearing an unforgettable story. Henry walked slowly around the room, pausing at each photograph. He remembered every face, every smile, and every musical piece they had performed together. Among the many items on the shelves was a photograph of his wife, Mary. Her warm smile always transported him back to when they dreamed of the future together. Henry sighed, touching the glass of the frame softly, and whispered, "Mary, how I miss you." Moving through the hall, he entered the kitchen, where the old teapot awaited him on the stove. Henry lit the fire, and as the teapot began to heat up, he decided to make himself a small breakfast. The refrigerator creaked as it opened, and he took out eggs and milk. Standing by the stove, he listened to the water in the teapot as it began to boil, and the aroma of scrambled eggs filled the kitchen. After breakfast, Henry wandered the house again, entering the music room. The old piano stood in the corner, slightly dusty. Occasionally, he would sit down to remind himself of the times when music filled every corner of the house. His fingers touched the keys, and the sounds filled the room with echoes of the past. The melody was quiet and reflective, full of nostalgia for days gone by. After a few minutes of playing, Henry stood and walked to the window. The garden behind the house was ablaze with the colors of autumn. He watched the falling leaves, each reminding him of the inevitability of change. Time goes on, everything changes, he mused. But it's important to keep warmth and light in the heart despite all the trials. Closing his eyes, he breathed in the cool autumn air, which brought the scent of fading nature into the house. At that moment, his heart filled with peace. He knew that despite all the losses and loneliness, his home would always be a source of comfort and memories of loved ones. Opening his eyes, Henry felt a surge of strength. He knew that not everything had been said yet and that his life was a melody that must continue. The soft evening breeze gently rustled the leaves on the trees around Mr. Henry's house as he and Mr. Berman settled on the old wooden porch, enjoying the coolness after a hot day. On the table between them stood a six-pack of beer, with 4 empty cans and the 5th just opened by Berman. Halfway through his beer, Henry watched with interest as his old friend, with genuine joy and ease, handled life despite his years. "Berman, damn it, how have you managed to live to such an age with your lifestyle? What's your secret?" he asked with a slight smirk. Berman smiled back, took a sip from his can, and looked at his friend with a mischievous sparkle in his eyes. "My secret? I live, Henry. That's all. No secrets or magic recipes. Just take each day as if it's the last." He deftly tossed the empty can into the trash can 10 meters from the porch. It hit the target with a crash. "See? Not all is lost yet," he laughed, opening the next one. Henry nodded, still smiling. "At your age, many can't even take a step without assistance, and here you are, ready to join a basketball team." Berman chuckled. "Exactly, buddy. And now listen to what I found out today." Berman's tone became more serious. "They say on the news that tornadoes are becoming more frequent, and our town is in the risk zone. You know we don't have any shelters here." Henry raised his eyebrows, putting his can aside. "And what do you suggest? Let's build a shelter together. I have the number of a local excavator guy. He promised to give a discount to old farts like us." Henry smiled, studying his friend. "You're not afraid of lung cancer or liver cirrhosis, but you're afraid of tornadoes? You're quite the character, Berman." "Hey, listen," Berman said seriously. "I wouldn't want my old butt flying over the town in a whirlwind. Can you imagine that sight?" They both laughed, and then Henry, still smiling, nodded. "All right, I'll consider your proposal." A month later, he passed unnoticed after Berman suggested building the shelter. The friends continued to meet, discussing everything except storms and shelters, as if the thought of disaster dissolved in the currents of time and old age. Berman seemed to forget about his initiative, caught up in more down-to-earth topics like gardening and fishing. On the other hand, Henry continued his daily trips to the market, enjoying the quiet rhythm of the passing days. This day, he started like any other, with a gloomy morning hanging over the town like a heavy, gray curtain. The sky was covered with clouds, and a tense anticipation of something inevitable hung in the air. Despite the ominous signs, Henry went to the market for fresh produce. In his basket were tomatoes, potatoes, and greens. Henry opened the umbrella he had bought many years ago as the first raindrops began to fall, slowly dampening the cobblestones. He remembered with sadness how he and his wife used it during long autumn walks. He strolled, allowing thoughts and memories to intertwine with the rhythm of the raindrops hitting the umbrella fabric. A sudden alarm sounded as he passed by the old bookstore and turned onto the street leading to his house. The sound was so sharp and unexpected that many on the street froze, then hurriedly ran into the nearest houses, grabbing their pets, forgetting everything except the impending threat. The wind picked up, becoming more aggressive with each gust. Henry quickened his pace, trying to hold onto the umbrella billowing like a sail. But soon, the wind tore it from his hands, and like a light bird, the umbrella flew off toward the gray approaching clouds. Henry looked around, the street quickly emptied. He felt the wind lifting him, and his old legs no longer obeyed him. Suddenly unable to maintain his balance, he slipped and fell on the wet asphalt. The world around him blurred, and all sound seemed to fade away. There was only the roar of the siren echoing through the deserted town. Lying on the cold, wet ground, Henry tried to concentrate, but consciousness was leaving him. The only thing he could feel was the cold seeping into every corner of his body and the ominous sound of the siren, which seemed to herald the end of everything he knew. The air in the TV studio was charged. Journalists and technical staff moved tensely, adjusting equipment and exchanging brief commands. At the center of this whirlwind stood Tom Rogers, an experienced local television reporter, preparing to host a live broadcast that could become a historical witness to one of the most devastating events in the city's history. The camera turned on, and Tom, gathering his thoughts, began his report with a composed face that masked his inner turmoil. Good evening. Today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our city experienced a horrifying natural phenomenon. According to preliminary data, a powerful tornado with wind speeds reaching 400 kilometers per hour hit this area. This is the first instance of such a destructive tornado in our history. The camera showed scenes from the disaster site: collapsed buildings, overturned cars, devastated streets. The video was shocking. The city, which seemed alive and full of energy just that morning, was now reduced to ruins. Rescue teams and military units are currently working at the disaster site, trying to break through the destroyed roads and flooded areas, Tom continued, his voice calm. Still, each word emphasized the gravity of the situation. Much of the city remains inaccessible, and although the exact number of casualties has not yet been established, there are concerns for many residents who may not have found shelter in time. Images of rescuers appeared on the screen. Despite the danger, they continued their work, clearing debris in search of survivors. It was evident how they lifted wreckage, trying to reach those who might be underneath. We pray for all those affected by this terrible disaster, Tom concluded, his voice slightly trembling, giving in to emotions. We will continue to monitor the situation and update you as new information becomes available. This was Tom Rogers. The camera slowly faded, leaving Tom standing in the studio in silence. The sound of dripping water and muffled voices disturbed the otherwise eerie silence. Mr. Henry slowly regained consciousness, his battered body responding with pain to every movement. The cold penetrated every cell, making him shiver. Echoes of the moments before the fall, the wind, the cries, the siren, resounded in his head. He opened his eyes, and the scene that unfolded before him resembled something from a horror movie. The basement was half flooded, water reaching ankle deep. Scattered items lay in disarray. In one corner stood a billiard table, now submerged in dirty water. 8 people, including Henry, were in this grim room. People sat or stood, holding their heads in their hands or silently staring, trying to collect their thoughts after the shock they had experienced. A man approached Henry with a bottle of water. "Are you okay?" His voice was quiet, but genuine concern was evident. "What happened here?" Henry asked, taking the water. "We found you on the street when the tornado started. You were unconscious. We couldn't leave you there," replied a woman who turned out to be the house owner. "My husband built this basement for gatherings with friends, but today, it became our shelter." In the corner of the basement sat a boy, about 13 years old, who looked at Henry with a mix of curiosity and considerable fear. "Who's this kid?" Henry asked, pointing to him. "We don't know his name. He was alone when we found him on the street. He was hiding under a tree, and we brought him with us," the woman replied. The boy remained silent, his eyes filled with worry and loneliness. Henry looked at him more closely and realized that his face seemed familiar. Perhaps he had seen him before. Henry thought about his friend Berman and how they had discussed possibly building a shelter to protect them. The basement was filled with tense silence, occasionally broken by the banging and scraping as several men tried to break down the blocked door. They worked tirelessly, shouting instructions to each other over the noise and the howling wind still raging outside. Henry slowly moved closer to the boy sitting against the wall with his knees hugged to his chest. The older man's heart ached at the sight of the small, frightened child lost in the chaos of the unprecedented disaster. "Where are you from, kid?" Henry asked softly, trying not to scare the child any further. The boy remained silent, his eyes shining as he looked at the older man, trying to decide if he could trust him. Meanwhile, one of the women, the wife of the basement's owner, started handing out food from the supplies stored in the basement. Henry took 2 rolls and handed one to the boy. The child took it and started eating but still didn't speak. Henry kept observing him, trying to recall where he might have seen this boy before. Images of the market, streets, and park flashed through his mind, places where he might have encountered him. After they finished their food, Henry took a bottle of water from the woman and handed it to the boy, who drank silently, still studying the older man with his big, frightened eyes. "Why aren't you talking?" Henry gently asked, trying to encourage the boy to open up. Perhaps the child was too scared to speak, or worse, something had happened to his ability to talk. Henry started considering various possibilities. "Do you have a family?" Henry asked, hoping to spark a response. The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head slowly. Henry placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here with us." From shock to injury, the boy responded by turning to him and making a shushing gesture with his finger, then slowly nodding, confirming that he indeed couldn't speak. At that moment, the door finally gave way to the men's efforts. A flashlight beam cut through the basement's darkness, and the door opening's clattering sound momentarily drowned out all other noises. The light fell on the faces of the people inside, reflecting a mixture of relief and fear of the unknown that awaited them outside. The basement door creaked heavily, and those who dared to go first began slowly making their way outside. Though dimmed by dust and debris, the daylight was blinding after the long hours in the dark shelter. Women and children gathered at the narrow exit, cautiously peeking outside, trying to grasp the extent of the disaster. When Henry and the boy followed the others, they were confronted with devastation that exceeded all their fears. The house that once sheltered the basement was almost wiped off the face of the earth, as were most of the buildings in the area. A few houses had miraculously survived, though they were severely damaged. Debris, roofs, overturned cars, and uprooted trees were scattered everywhere. The family, whose basement had sheltered Henry and the others, started searching through the rubble of their home, looking for anything that could be salvaged. They turned over every stone, every piece of debris, hoping to find something intact. Other families also slowly made their way to their homes, each step a struggle against the piles of destruction. Henry and the boy, now alone, stood in the middle of the street, surveying the apocalyptic landscape. "Where is your home? Can you show me?" Henry asked. The boy slowly shook his head, his eyes filled with anxiety and confusion. "Maybe you could walk me to my house," Henry suggested. The boy nodded and took the older man's hand. Henry and the boy moved through the ruined city, staying close to each other in the oppressive silence. Once full of life and activity, the streets now lay under a heavy shroud of destruction. Debris from buildings, overturned cars, and scattered furniture created a maze they had to navigate. The sky still loomed with heavy gray clouds, occasionally releasing new torrents of rain. The water mixed with dust and dirt, forming thick sludge underfoot. Henry, leaning on a found stick, led the boy, trying to choose the safest path through the wreckage. Each time Henry saw bodies on the ground, his heart ached with pain and pity. He did everything he could to prevent the boy from facing these horrifying sights, finding excuses to turn onto another street or avoid another corpse, inventing stories about something interesting ahead. "Look, that street over there seems less damaged. Let's go that way, it might be safer," he said whenever a grisly scene appeared. The boy followed Henry silently, his face covered with an invisible mask of fatigue and shock. Yet whenever Henry suggested a new route, the boy nodded in agreement, trusting the older man's guidance. They moved slowly but steadily, two souls navigating a landscape transformed by nature's fury, bound together by a shared need for survival and a fragile hope for the future. There was a flicker of gratitude in the boy's eyes for the care, the protection, and the effort to preserve some semblance of his childhood, even in such dire conditions. After exhausting hours, they finally reached where Henry's house once stood. The walls of the building were seriously damaged but still standing, unlike many other buildings in the area. The facade was marred, windows shattered, and the door wrenched off its hinges, but it still resembled a home. The older man and the boy stopped, surveying the ruins. Henry felt a mixture of emotions, bitterness over the loss and relief that they had made it this far. He looked at the boy, who seemed small and vulnerable against the backdrop of the collapsed world. "We made it," Henry said quietly, trying to give some meaning to the words. As Henry and the boy approached the house, they paused to take in the extent of the damage. Silence reigned, broken only by occasional gusts of wind that still carried the echo of the departed storm. The house, built by Henry's father, stood like the last bastion in the ruined world. The roof was gone, exposing the sky, windows shattered and doors ripped from their hinges. Like the car now lying overturned in a neighboring yard, the garage had vanished without a trace. The fence and all the backyard structures were gone as if they had never existed. The lawn was strewn with debris, broken glass, and smashed furniture. Yet despite all this, the house's walls had withstood the onslaught. The older man felt pride, recalling his father's words about building the house out of stone rather than prefabricated frames. "I want this house to stand for centuries," his father had said, "to be a fortress for you, your children, and your grandchildren." These words now seemed prophetic, fulfilled in the most devastating hour. The boy, stepping over the debris, stopped and gazed at the house in wonder. His tiny hands formed a rectangular shape, and he repeated this gesture, pointing at the walls. Henry nodded, understanding his gestures. "Yes, this house was built to withstand storms. It's strong, just like us," he said, touching the boy's shoulder. They began inspecting the house, navigating through the rubble inside. Some rooms were almost untouched, while others bore the marks of wind and rain on every surface. In the living room, photographs lay scattered on the floor, each telling a story of past days. Henry picked up one, dusty and slightly bent, a photo of his parents on their wedding day. He momentarily held it to his heart, then carefully placed it on a table. Henry carefully entered the ground floor, avoiding debris and broken glass. Everything was wet and damaged, but surprisingly, much of the homely warmth remained. The air was filled with the scent of rain and the faint aroma of old paper and books. Despite the destruction, the house still felt like home, though now shadowed by catastrophe. The boy followed Henry with curiosity, examining the older man's dwelling. Suddenly, the boy tugged Henry's sleeve, pointing to a slightly tilted refrigerator in the kitchen corner. Henry looked at him in surprise, not understanding what the boy meant. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The boy shook his head. Henry approached the refrigerator, opening it carefully. Inside, amidst the spoiled food, was a small metal box. Puzzled, he pulled it out and opened it to find it filled with old family photos, letters, and keepsakes. Henry smiled, realizing the boy had sensed something valuable was inside. "Good eye," Henry said, patting the boy's shoulder. "These are memories worth saving." As they sifted through the box together, Henry felt a renewed sense of hope. Despite the destruction around them, they had found something precious that the storm couldn't take away, memories and the beginnings of a new bond between an older man and a young boy, both survivors of a world turned upside down. Despite everything, some of the food in the refrigerator still seemed edible. Henry took out some sausage and cheese suitable for simple sandwiches and headed to the kitchen table, which had remained in place. While preparing the food, Henry continued talking to the boy, trying to learn more about his life, his parents, and his home. However, the boy was very reserved, and Henry had to extract each piece of information like small mosaic fragments. "Where have I seen you before?" Henry asked, hoping it would help the boy open up. The boy thought for a moment, then, with a sad smile, extended his hand like a beggar and made sorrowful eyes. This gesture reminded Henry of what he had seen at the market, where the boy had been begging. Suddenly, it all made sense. "You were at the market, right? You were begging," Henry said, realizing the boy likely came from an underprivileged family and spent more time on the streets than at home. They sat down and began eating the cold sandwiches. Despite its simplicity, the meal tasted better than anything after what they had been through. After the meal, Henry realized their clothes were soaked from the rain and wind. "We need to change into dry clothes," he said, looking around for a wardrobe. Together, they searched the closets, but all the clothes were either wet or heavily soiled with dirt and water brought in by the hurricane. While Henry checked every corner of the house for dry clothes, the boy carefully examined the floor, picking up photos, awards, and broken musical instruments scattered by the storm. "It seems we won't find any dry clothes here," Henry said with a note of disappointment. He watched the boy inspecting an old flute found under the debris. Let's gather some wood and start a fire. We can dry our clothes by the fire, he suggested. The boy nodded in agreement and began gathering debris from wooden furniture, broken branches, and other flammable materials for the fire. Henry found old matches and kindling in a corner of the porch. Soon, they had a fire on the porch in front of the house. The flames flickered, illuminating their tired but determined faces. They hung 2 sweaters and pants over the fire, letting the heat slowly dry them. While the clothes dried, Henry found an old but intact pot in the damaged kitchen. He carefully hung it over the fire, filling it with water from a bottle they found in the basement. He made a soup, collecting some canned vegetables and a piece of meat. It won't be a gourmet dinner, but it will warm us up, he told the boy, who curiously watched the process. In the distance, sirens started to wail as rescuers rushed to help those in need. When the soup was ready, they sat on the porch steps, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the first spoonfuls of hot soup, which turned out to be surprisingly tasty. This simple meal amidst the devastation became a small celebration for them, a symbol of hope and renewal, showing that even in the darkest times, a source of light and warmth could be found. That day, the kitchen in Henry's house became a refuge not only from the destruction of the outside world but also from their internal anxieties. After they cleared away the broken glass and scattered items, the kitchen took on a semblance of order, which soothed them both. Henry reheated the leftover soup they had cooked the previous evening, and they sat by the window to eat. During their meal, activity picked up outside. Through the broken windows, they could see bulldozers and other heavy machinery slowly moving through the streets, clearing debris and rubble to make way for ambulances and police vehicles. Sirens occasionally pierced the background hum of engines, a reminder that rescue operations were ongoing and that the city was slowly but surely trying to recover from the devastating storm. Henry looked at the boy and gently said, "Everything will be all right now. They'll take you to a shelter where you'll have everything you need and help find your family." He tried to sound confident, but his voice had a hint of doubt. The boy suddenly began gesturing frantically, trying to convey something to Henry. His face showed fear and anxiety, and it was clear that the idea of going to a shelter frightened him. Henry couldn't understand the boy's gestures, so he found a paper and a pencil. The boy quickly took them and started writing, his hand trembling with emotion. "I don't want to go to the shelter. It isn't good there. I've been there before. Please don't send me back," he wrote in large, clumsy letters. Henry sighed, understanding how difficult the boy's past had been. "You can't stay on the streets, especially now," he said quietly, trying to find a compromise. At that moment, rescuers appeared outside the window. The boy looked at them with fear and moved towards the door as if he was about to run. Henry quickly grabbed his hand, holding it in place. "Wait, you definitely can't go outside now." He pointed to a closet. "Hide in there, and I'll tell them there's no one else here. Stay quiet until I say it's safe to come out." The boy nodded and quickly climbed into the closet, curling up among the wet clothes. Henry stood, preparing to meet the rescuers with dignity. He knew his decision might have consequences, but he had no doubts. The city streets were full of rescuers diligently searching for survivors after the devastating tornado. Armed with flashlights, medical supplies, and equipment to clear debris, they searched every corner, calling out for anyone who might be trapped in the ruins of their homes. When rescuers approached Henry's house, the walls still stood despite the missing roof and broken windows. Henry met them at the door, trying to hide his worry and not show that someone else was in the house. "Good afternoon, sir. We recommend that all residents evacuate to a safe place. We have temporary shelters with everything you need," one of the rescuers began, his voice tired but resolute. Henry nodded but declined. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm fine. I've lived here all my life, and I'm not leaving." His voice was firm, though he felt a twinge of anxiety deep down. The rescuers insisted. "We understand your desire to stay, but the situation is hazardous. There could be explosions from damaged gas tanks, unstable buildings. It's not safe. Believe me, many people need your help more than I do," Henry insisted, slowly moving away from the door to prevent them from looking inside. "I'll manage. Please help those who need it." The rescuers exchanged glances, shrugging in confusion. One of them asked, "Are you here alone? We need to make sure everyone is safe." Henry felt his heart skip a beat. "Yes, I'm alone," he lied, trying to sound as convincing as possible. He couldn't risk the boy's safety, who was hiding in the house. Satisfied with his answer, the rescuers agreed to leave him alone. "All right, sir. Just in case, we'll leave you with some drinking water and medical supplies. Be careful," one of them said before they moved on to the next house. The boy cautiously emerged from the closet as soon as the rescuers left. He glanced at Henry to ensure everything was okay, then headed to the kitchen, where old papers and stationery were scattered. Finding a sheet of paper and a pencil, he quickly wrote a few words and handed the note to Henry. "Why don't you evacuate with everyone else?" Henry took the paper, read it, and sighed. He sat down on a chair that had survived the storm and began to explain. "I can't leave this house. It's all I have left. And now I need to look after you." The boy nodded, understanding his words, though not entirely. He looked at Henry with respect and gratitude. Inside, he felt a growing sense that he had finally found a place where he was truly understood and accepted. Henry stood up and began sorting through the scattered items the storm had thrown around the house. The boy followed his lead, trying to be as helpful as possible. They worked in silence, occasionally exchanging glances and gestures to understand each other. When the boy picked up unfamiliar objects, he showed them to Henry, who explained where to put them. Slowly, they brought order to the house, restoring it from chaos. Henry gathered photographs of his students and placed them back in their original spots. Each picture reminded him of happy moments and achievements he was proud of. The boy, in turn, picked up musical awards from the floor, trophies, medals, and statuettes. He scrutinized each one, marveling at their variety and beauty. "That one is for winning the city competition," Henry said, pointing to one of the trophies. "And that one is for Teacher of the Year. And this statue I received for my contribution to music." The boy listened with admiration, his eyes shining with respect and curiosity. He understood that Henry was not just a teacher but a man of significant accomplishments. But a person who had made a significant impact on many lives. Henry picked it up from the floor when they stumbled upon a violin case and gently dusted it off. He opened the case and was relieved to see the violin inside was unharmed. The sturdy case had protected it from destruction. "This is my favorite violin," Henry said, holding the instrument tenderly. "It's older than me. My father gave it to me. When I play it, I feel connected to the past, to those who came before me." The boy watched with interest, his eyes filled with admiration. He gestured to ask if he could take a closer look at the violin. Henry smiled and handed him the instrument. "Be careful," he warned. The boy took the violin with reverence, examining every detail. He didn't know how to play, but his eyes showed determination to learn. "This violin has always been my favorite instrument," Henry began, his voice warm with nostalgia. "Although I can play many instruments, this violin has always held a special place in my heart. It's older than me. My father gave it to me when I was your age. Since then, it has accompanied me throughout my life." The boy listened intently, absorbing every word. Then he gestured that he wanted to see Henry play. Henry, seeing this gesture, smiled but shook his head. "I haven't played in a long time," he said, returning the violin to the boy. "Why don't you give it a try? Come on, I'll show you how to hold it properly." The boy took the violin cautiously, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. He struggled to hold the instrument correctly but unsuccessfully. Henry stepped closer and adjusted his grip, explaining how to keep the violin in the bow. "Like this, hold it firmly but not too tightly. Now place the bow on the strings and draw it gently," Henry instructed, guiding the boy's movements. The bow slid across the strings, producing a scratchy, uneven sound. The boy flinched, startled by the sudden and sharp noise, and almost dropped the violin. Henry laughed gently, patting him on the shoulder. "For a first try, that's perfectly normal," he said, encouraging the boy. "Try again. The key is not to be afraid of the sounds. Music takes time and patience." Inspired by Henry's words, the boy placed the bow on the strings again. This time, he was more confident in his movements. The sounds the instrument produced were still far from a melody, but they no longer had the same harshness and fear. Henry watched the boy with pride and tenderness. In each of his movements, he saw a reflection of himself in his youth when he, too, was learning to play the violin. He understood that before him stood not just a child but a future musician who would one day create his melody filled with passion and emotion. After a few attempts, the boy stopped and looked at Henry with a smile full of joy and satisfaction. He gestured that he wanted to hear Henry play. The older man sighed but couldn't refuse. He took the violin, tuned it, and began to play. Slowly, old fingers glided over the strings with surprising ease, and the melody from the bow was full of life and emotion. The room filled with music, and the boy listened, holding his breath. His eyes shone with genuine joy and admiration. Time passed, and the heavy machinery cleared almost all the debris. On the city streets, people constantly worked, restoring infrastructure, clearing roads, and helping each other in this challenging situation. Despite all its troubles, the city gradually came back to life. Henry and the boy worked hard to put the first floor of the house in order. They removed all the broken items, repaired what could be fixed, and covered the broken windows with plastic sheeting to protect the house from rain and wind. The roof was one of the most challenging tasks, but with the help of the rescuers, they managed to restore most of it. Several times, the rescuers tried again to persuade Henry to move to the camp for those affected. They assured him he would have everything for a comfortable life there. But Henry firmly refused. He couldn't leave the boy, who had already become like a son to him. The older man understood that the boy wouldn't be as well off in the camp as he was here, where he felt safe and had found something like a new family. The boy became increasingly interested in music. His curiosity and desire to learn were boundless. Henry began teaching him, passing on his knowledge and skills. The boy was very talented and learned surprisingly quickly. He picked up everything on the fly and, within a few weeks, could play simple melodies on the violin. Each day began with housework and ended with music lessons. For both of them, music became a way to forget about the surrounding hardships and an actual bridge between generations, helping them find a common language. One evening, as they sat on the porch resting after a long day, Henry looked at the boy with pride. "You know, you're becoming a real musician," he said. "Your father would be proud." The boy blushed and continued to pluck the strings on his violin. He couldn't speak, but his eyes spoke for him. They shone with happiness and gratitude. The boy had found a teacher and a friend, someone he could trust. Life in the ruined city was full of challenges, but Henry and the boy faced them together. They created a new reality, restoring the house, studying music, and enjoying each other's company. With each passing day, their bond grew more robust, and they knew that despite all the difficulties, they could overcome any obstacle as long as they stayed together. The evening sun softly lit Henry's house as he stood in the kitchen, feeling a sense of contentment and hope. The city was healing, and so were they. Cooking on a portable gas stove, a faint smell of burning gas mixed with the aroma of boiling vegetables and meat. Henry was focused, carefully stirring the soup in the pot to prevent it from burning. The sounds of the violin came from the living room, the melody the boy diligently practiced daily, dedicating all his free time to playing. Henry smiled as he listened to the music, hearing progress, joy, and the boy's passion for his lessons. He reminded himself it was time to call him for dinner. Turning off the stove, Henry wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and headed to the living room. "Hey, musician," he called with a smile. "Time for dinner." The boy, absorbed in the music, didn't hear him at first. Then, noticing Henry's movement, he stopped, lowered the bow, and looked up. His face lit up with a smile when he saw the older man, and he carefully set the violin down on the table. They carried their food out to the porch, where they had set up a small table and 2 chairs. Sunlight played on the table's surface, and a gentle breeze brought the freshness of the summer evening. Henry ladled soup into bowls and handed one to the boy. They sat across from each other, savoring the simple but essential moment. "One day, you'll be a famous musician," Henry said, watching the boy eat the soup with appetite. His words were full of confidence and hope. The boy smiled as he continued to eat, his eyes sparkling with happiness and gratitude. He loved these moments when he and Henry could sit together, share a meal, and discuss the future. After a few minutes of silence, Henry spoke more seriously this time. We need to discuss how we'll live from now on. Sooner or later, the government will find out you're living with me without parents or documents. What will we do then? The boy shrugged, not knowing what to say. He had grown accustomed to life with Henry, the music, and the peace he had finally found, and the thought of losing all that terrified him. I understand you like it here, Henry continued, looking at the boy carefully. But we have to be ready for any circumstances. Maybe we should think about how to legalize your stay here. Perhaps I can arrange for guardianship over you. The boy shrugged again, but a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. He didn't want to think about losing Henry and the music. He needed time to figure out what to do next. We'll manage, Henry said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. We'll find a way. For now, we'll keep living as we have been and enjoy each day. The boy nodded, his smile returning. He picked up the violin and began to play a quiet melody that filled the evening silence. Henry listened, feeling his heart swell with pride and hope. Deciding on a significant step, Henry retrieved an old box where he had saved money over the years for his funeral. Now, those savings had to serve a different purpose. Henry and the boy dressed and set out for the big city, hoping to find out what had happened to the boy's parents and how to avoid the shelter. The journey was long and tense. Henry drove silently, lost in his thoughts, while the boy looked out the window, watching the passing landscapes. His eyes showed a mix of hope and fear. He understood that this day could change his life forever. They arrived at the relief center for hurricane victims, a large building where people bustled about, trying to help everyone in need. Henry and the boy entered an office where a young woman with a tired but kind face greeted them. How can I help you? She asked, looking at them with understanding. Henry explained the situation, telling her about the boy and his parents. The woman listened attentively, nodding occasionally, and then began checking the information in the database. After a few minutes, she looked up and gently said, I'm very sorry, but his parents died during the hurricane. The boy froze, then gripped Henry's hand, tears rolling down his cheeks. Henry hugged him, trying to offer comfort. The woman continued, the boy must go to a shelter because you don't have legal guardianship rights. You're old and alone, and the system won't allow you to assume such responsibility. Henry felt his heart tighten with pain and helplessness. He understood that his age and loneliness were severe obstacles, but the thought of the boy ending up in a shelter again tore at his soul. They left the building and found a small cafe nearby. Sitting at a table, they ordered ice cream, but their mood was far from festive. Henry knew he had to be honest with the boy, even if the truth was bitter. You know I am too old, he began, his voice trembling with emotion. My house is ruined, and I don't have the means to take you in. You must go to the shelter to get your documents and eventually find a job. The boy sadly finished his ice cream, but his eyes showed understanding. He knew Henry was doing everything he could for his well-being, even if it meant parting ways. The look he gave the older man was full of gratitude and love. We'll always stay in touch, Henry continued, trying to comfort the boy. You'll grow and strengthen, and I'll always support you. The boy nodded, trying to hold back tears. He understood the challenges that lay ahead, but he knew Henry would never abandon him. Their bond was more robust than any obstacle, and they found solace. They spent the rest of the day together, enjoying each other's company and trying not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Henry tried not to dwell on the impending separation as they returned to the city. He knew it was inevitable, but every moment spent together felt precious. Before saying goodbye, Henry decided to give the boy one last gift to show how much he meant to him. They went to a store where Henry bought the boy new clothes, shoes, and everything he would need for life in the shelter. Then they went to a phone store where Henry purchased a mobile phone so they could always stay in touch. He knew this would help the boy feel less alone. When they got back home, a heavy silence hung over the porch. They stood there quietly, realizing that the moment of parting was near. Henry held the violin, the instrument that symbolized their bond and shared hope for the future. I want you to keep playing music, Henry said, handing the violin to the boy. His voice trembled, but he tried to stay strong. Music is a part of you, and it will always be with you, no matter how far away you are. The boy took the violin, his eyes glistening with tears. He hugged Henry tightly, expressing all his gratitude and love. The older man returned the hug, feeling his heart ache. They stood there for several minutes, unable to let go of each other. At that moment, the child services car pulled up to the house. Henry and the boy had to break their embrace as the social workers stepped out to take the boy. Henry watched as the boy, with sadness but bravery, got into the car, holding the violin. "I'll always be with you," Henry whispered as the car drove away. The boy looked at him from the window, nodding and understanding. Henry kept watching until the car disappeared from view, leaving behind a dusty road and an emptiness in his heart. When silence returned, Henry slowly walked into the house and sat down. The house felt empty and cold without the boy. All his efforts to restore the place now seemed pointless. He sat in the silence, letting his thoughts wander. Time passed, and life slowly returned to normal. The compensation Henry received from the government allowed him to restore the house. Builders worked tirelessly to restore it to its former state, and soon, it resembled the cozy refuge it had been before the disaster. Henry stood at the entrance, looking at his renovated home, a feeling of satisfaction warming his heart. Everything was back in place. The photographs capturing joyful moments of life once again adorned the walls. The musical instruments he had collected over years of teaching stood in the living room, ready to play again. Henry slowly walked through the house, inhaling the smell of fresh paint and wood. Each restored detail made the house feel alive. But in his heart, there remained an enduring wish to see on the wall the photograph of the boy who had become part of his life. They constantly texted each other, and Henry was reassured by every message that the boy was safe and doing well in the shelter. Their bond, forged amid disaster, remained strong. Henry knew that no matter the distance, they would always be connected by the music and shared memories. And this gave Henry comfort and hope. He knew the boy was safe and not alone in this world. Henry also tried to visit the boy at the shelter as often as possible. Each visit was like a breath of fresh air for him. He brought the boy new sheet music and shared stories from his own life while the boy shared his musical achievements and successes. These meetings became a real celebration for both of them. However, the boy wasn't allowed to stay with Henry because he was underage. Henry knew this was a legally right decision, but it broke his heart that he couldn't take the boy home. He understood he had to be patient and wait until the boy was old enough to make his own decisions. One day, after another visit to the shelter, Henry returned home and sat in the living room. He looked at the walls adorned with photographs and realized he was missing one crucial picture, a photo of the boy. Taking his mobile phone, he sent a message. "I want to have your picture on my wall next to my students. You're like family to me." The reply immediately came. "I'll try to be on your wall." Life went on, and the house was once again filled with music. Henry played his instruments, imagining the boy listening to his playing. He knew that new challenges awaited them, but he was also confident they could overcome anything together. Every day, Henry lived with the hope and belief that the boy would return to him and they would be together again. This hope gave him the strength to move forward, enjoy each moment, and create new dreams in the restored house. Years passed since the hurricane had shattered their lives, and Henry began to notice that old age was slowly taking its toll. What had once been a solid and resilient body was now failing him. Getting up each morning became increasingly complex, and daily chores around the house became challenging. He could no longer perform his usual duties as he once had. Henry knew his health was deteriorating. Visits to his doctor became frequent and unavoidable. One day, the doctor had a serious talk with him, advising that he move into a nursing home where he could receive the necessary care and supervision. "Henry," the doctor said, looking at him with concern, "you can't live alone anymore. You need constant care that only a specialized facility can provide. Please think about it." But Henry couldn't accept this idea. He didn't want to leave his home, where all his memories and dreams were concentrated. Every room and corner of this house was full of history, and the thought of leaving it seemed unbearable. Due to his declining health and constant fatigue, Henry became less frequent in communicating with the boy. About to turn 18, the boy was busy with paperwork and finding housing. Henry understood that he had a lot on his plate, but every time they spoke on the phone, he only cared about one thing. Have you given up on music? The boy always replied, No, Grandpa, I haven't given up. Music is still a part of my life. Henry sat in his living room, clutching an old teacup, when he heard a knock on the door. His heart raced. It was the knock he had been waiting for. He rose slowly, trying not to rush, and opened the door. Standing in the doorway was the boy, now almost a grown man, with a smile and a tablet. Henry could barely hold back tears as he looked at him. They embraced, and all the feelings Henry had held inside burst out in this strong hug. Come in, have a seat, Henry said, gesturing for the boy to enter. They sat in the kitchen and poured themselves some tea. The conversation flowed easily and casually as if they hadn't been apart for so long. The boy talked about his life, how he managed to get government housing, and how he was gradually building a career as a musician. His eyes lit up as he spoke about his work and accomplishments. I met a wonderful girl at the shelter, he wrote on the tablet, sliding it over to Henry. She's also into music. We're helping each other and dreaming about the future. Henry rejoiced listening to all this news. He felt pride and happiness filling his heart. The boy had grown up, become independent, and found his calling in life. It was what Henry had dreamed of while raising him. You must show me your musical achievements, Henry requested, his eyes shining joyfully. I want to hear you play. The boy smiled and wrote on the tablet, I brought my violin. Let me play for you. With that, the boy took out his violin, tuned it, and began to play. The room filled with a beautiful melody, a testament to his growth and dedication. Henry listened, tears of joy streaming down his face, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. Despite all the challenges and separation, their bond had endured, and their shared music had become a lasting legacy. As the evening sun softly lit Henry's house, the music played on, symboling hope, love, and the unbreakable connection between the older man and the boy who had become his family. Not now, Grandpa, but someday you'll see my skills, the boy replied with a smile. They continued talking late into the night, sharing memories and making plans for the future. Henry felt that these moments with the boy were the most precious in his life. He knew his love and connection with the boy would remain forever, even if time and health failed him. When it was time to say goodbye, the boy realized Henry was not doing well. He noticed the tiredness and weakness in the older man's eyes, slow movements, and heavy breathing. The boy knew something needed to be done to help his grandfather. They hugged at the door, and Henry felt tears welling up. He didn't want to let the boy go but understood it was necessary. The boy left, leaving Henry standing at the threshold, watching as the car disappeared into the night. Returning home, Henry sat down on a chair and closed his eyes. He thought about all the joyful moments they had shared and about the future, which seemed bright and hopeful despite all the difficulties. One evening, Henry felt a sharp pain in his chest. Trying not to panic, he grabbed his heart and managed to dial 911 before his world plunged into darkness. Consciousness left him, and he collapsed to the floor, the phone slipping from his trembling hands. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the medics acted swiftly, placing Henry on a stretcher and rushing him to the hospital. His condition was critical, and every minute mattered. In the hospital room, amidst the flickering of monitors and the muted hum of medical staff, Henry lay unconscious, fighting for his life. When he finally regained consciousness, he heard bits of conversation from doctors behind the curtain. Their voices were filled with concern and uncertainty. His condition is serious, one of the doctors said. We need to perform surgery urgently, or he won't survive. But his insurance doesn't cover such expenses. Henry felt his heart squeeze with fear and helplessness. He knew that without the surgery, his days were numbered. All his thoughts immediately turned to the boy. How could he leave him alone in this world? How could he allow himself to go without securing the boy's future? The doctor continued, we can try to contact his family or loved ones to raise funds, but time is short. Henry closed his eyes, trying not to give in to despair. He knew he had to fight not only for his own life but for the life of the boy who had become his family. At that moment, he heard the door to the room open, and someone new entered. Doctor, I just got a call, began the new voice. Someone is willing to cover all the necessary procedures. We need to fill out the paperwork. Henry opened his eyes and saw a nurse approaching his bed. Mr. Henry, you have a visitor. He says he can help. Minutes later, a young man entered the room with a tablet. Henry immediately recognized him. The boy had grown up, become independent, and was now ready to help his friend. His eyes were filled with determination and love. Grandpa, I heard about your condition, he wrote on the tablet. I'm here to help. Everything will be okay. Tears welled up in Henry's eyes. He reached out, and the boy squeezed his hand tightly. At that moment, they both realized that their bond was more robust than any trial and could overcome any obstacle together. The boy quickly contacted the hospital administration, and soon, all the necessary documents were processed with payment confirmation. The doctors immediately began preparing for surgery. Henry knew he faced a difficult road to recovery, but he also knew he wasn't alone in this battle. Henry slowly opened his eyes, feeling a slight dizziness and weakness. He was in the hospital room again, but this time, the sensations were utterly different. The scent of antiseptics hung in the air, and the quiet beeping of medical devices reminded him that he was still alive and breathing. He felt relief. The chest pain was gone. The doctor soon came to him, smiling with relief. Mr. Henry, the surgery was successful. Your hospital bills have been fully covered. Although you're not young, given your post-operative condition, you have every chance to live for many more years. Henry smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude and joy. He knew he had something to fight for and live for. A young woman entered the room with a bright smile at that moment. She approached the bed and introduced herself. Hello, Mr. Henry. My name is Emily. I'm your old friend's fiancé. He couldn't come because he's preparing for a concert, but he wants you to attend his performance. Henry raised his eyebrows in surprise. Concert? What concert? And how is my boy doing? He asked, his heart beating faster with excitement. Emily smiled even more comprehensively. Everything's fine, Mr. Henry. Your boy is doing great. He couldn't come himself because he's busy, but as soon as you're back on your feet, we're expecting you at his concert. It's an important event for him, and he wants you there. Henry was struck by what was happening. He couldn't believe that the boy he had raised and supported was now becoming a successful musician and that he had such support as Emily. He felt warm inside from the realization that his efforts and love had not been in vain. I want to see him, Henry said softly, tears of joy in his eyes. And his performance. I am more proud of him than I can express in words. Emily nodded, understanding his emotions. We will arrange everything so that you can attend the concert. Meanwhile, rest and gather strength. Time in the hospital dragged on slowly, but Henry felt his strength returning with each passing day. He imagined the moment when he could see the boy on stage, hear his music, and feel proud that his student had become a true master. Finally, the day came when the doctors allowed Henry to leave the hospital. He was full of determination and hope. Emily came to pick him up and take him to the concert. The morning, he started with excitement and pleasant anticipation for Henry. Today was the day when he would see the boy on stage. In his heart, anxiety and joy intertwined, and every minute brought him closer to the moment he had been waiting for. Henry spent a long time choosing the right suit, which had to correspond to the importance of this event. He rummaged through his wardrobe, trying on one suit after another, but none seemed good enough. Finally, he settled on his favorite suit, dark blue with thin stripes, which always accentuated his figure and gave him confidence. He wore the suit to the most important events of his life, and today, he felt that this was one of those occasions. Looking into the mirror, Henry saw how time had left its mark on his face and body, but his eyes still burned with the fire of life. He adjusted his tie, reassuring himself that everything would be fine, and left the room, leaning on his cane. Emily was waiting for him in the living room, her face lit up with a warm smile. Are you ready? She asked, noticing his nervousness. I think so, Henry replied, trying to hide his nerves. They drove to the concert hall, the journey filled with excitement and anticipation. When they arrived, Henry was struck by the grandeur of the venue. It was a large, elegant hall filled with people who had come to hear the music. Emily guided him to his seat close to the stage, ensuring he had a perfect view. Henry felt his heart pounding as the lights dimmed and the audience hushed. The curtains opened, and the boy, now a confident young man, stepped onto the stage with his violin. The spotlight shone on him, highlighting his determined expression and the quiet strength in his eyes. He began to play, and the hall filled with the beautiful, soulful music to which he had dedicated his life. Each note resonated with emotion and skill, telling a story of perseverance, love, and hope. Henry watched, tears streaming down his face as the boy played with passion and grace. The music was a testament to their bond, a reflection of their shared journey. When the performance ended, the audience applauded, standing to honor the young musician. The boy looked out into the crowd, his eyes meeting Henry's. A smile spread across his face, and Henry felt an overwhelming sense of pride and fulfillment. After the concert, they reunited backstage. The boy ran to Henry, embracing him tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." Henry hugged him back, his heart overflowing with love. "You were amazing," he said. "I'm so proud of you." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their bond and the echo of the music, Henry knew that despite all the challenges and hardships, they had created something beautiful together. Their journey had been one of resilience and hope, and it was far from over. They would face the future together with the same strength and love that had carried them through the past. As they left the concert hall and stepped into the night, Henry felt a renewed sense of purpose. The boys' music had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter the obstacles, love and determination could overcome anything. They walked side by side, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they could achieve anything together. They left the house and got into the car parked nearby, ready to take them to the concert. Emily smiled, seeing how Henry struggled to cope with his excitement. The car started, and Henry felt his heart beating faster with each wheel turn. The road to the concert hall seemed endlessly long. Henry looked out the window, reflecting on how far he and the boy had come. Memories flashed through his mind, the first meeting, music lessons, shared dinners, and conversations. He saw how the boy grew and became more confident and how he found his passion in music. Noticing his contemplation, Emily said quietly, "He is very nervous but confident. This concert means a lot to him. He wants you to be proud of him." Henry smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "I'm already proud of him," he replied. Emily led Henry by the hand, helping him make his way to the concert hall. Henry felt his heart beat more robust with each step. He hadn't felt such excitement and anticipation in a long time. Henry took a deep breath when they reached the doors, preparing for what awaited him ahead. The concert hall was only a third full, but it didn't matter for Henry. He knew this moment would be unique. Emily escorted him to the center, in front of the stage, where the best seats were prepared for them. Henry sat down, feeling his heart filled with warmth and joy. When the lights in the hall dimmed, the orchestra appeared on stage. Henry observed, his gaze searching for the one who meant the most to him. And there, on stage, the boy appeared with a violin. Their eyes met, and Henry smiled, feeling joy spreading in his heart. The music began to play, filling the hall with its magical sounds. The boy played with such passion and mastery that tears welled in Henry's eyes. Every note spoke of love, loyalty, and gratitude. It was the music that bound their hearts together and told their story. Henry sat listening as the boy conveyed all the feelings they had experienced together. He felt tears streaming down his cheeks, but he didn't try to stop them. They were tears of joy and pride that spoke of their path's righteousness. When the music stopped, the hall fell momentarily silent. Then, the audience stood up and began to applaud. But this applause was not just for the musicians but also for Henry. The boy gathered all Henry's students to express their gratitude and respect. It was a moment when his entire life passed before his eyes. Henry stood, crying with joy and pride. He recognized all the people from his photos who now stood before him. They had all come to thank him, to show how much he meant to them. He never expected recognition, but it meant more to him than anything. After the concert, Henry and the boy returned home, their hearts still beating fast, and the conversation didn't cease. They sat at the kitchen table, with hot tea and fresh cookies on the table. Henry looked at the boy with pride and joy, admiring the person he had become. "That was an incredible concert," Henry began, smiling. "Of course, you still have a lot to learn, but you played quite well for your age." The boy responded with a smile and wrote on the tablet, "Thank you, Grandpa. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was an important moment for me." Henry nodded, feeling warmth filling his heart. Then the boy continued, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. He showed Henry a note on the tablet, saying they were getting married soon. Henry raised his eyebrows in surprise and joy. "That's wonderful news. I'm so happy for both of you." "And that's not all," the boy wrote, his smile growing wider. "You are invited to our wedding as an honorary guest. We want you to be there to share this important moment with us." Henry felt tears filling his eyes. "Thank you. It's a great honor for me. I'll be happy to come." The boy continued, "When we have a baby, we want you to teach him music." Henry laughed. "Oh, I doubt I'll live to see that moment. I'm just an old stump." But the boy shook his head, determination shining in his eyes. "No, Grandpa. You'll be there. We'll make sure of it." Henry smiled, feeling a renewed sense of hope and purpose. The journey they had shared had been filled with challenges, but it had also been filled with love and music. And now, as they looked forward to the future, they knew that their bond would continue to grow stronger, creating a legacy that would last for generations. The story of Henry and the boy is not only a touching tale about the bond between two generations but also a testament to the power of love, patience, and music. It demonstrates that genuine love and care can help people overcome challenges no matter how difficult life may be. One of the story's strengths is developing a relationship between Henry and the boy. Initially, Henry was just a lonely older man, but through helping the boy, he found new meaning in life. Their interactions created a deep and enduring bond, helping them grow and become stronger. The story also highlights the significant role of music in connecting people and overcoming hardships. Music is the boy's passion and a bridge between him and Henry. Through music lessons, they found empathy and deep understanding for each other, creating a solid and meaningful relationship. Moreover, the story vividly portrays the difficulties and challenges of old age. Henry's declining health and concerns about the future are real issues many older adults face. However, by focusing on love and care, the story shows that there is always hope and warmth, even in the most challenging times. Additionally, the story reminds us of the importance of family and mutual care. Family is not just about blood relations but also about the people we love and care for. The relationship between Henry and the boy exemplifies this, showing that love and care can transcend all boundaries and difficulties. Overall, the story of Henry and the boy is a beautiful and touching narrative that conveys messages about love, patience, and the power of music. It encourages us to cherish the relationships in our lives and always believe in the goodness of people.